this. Let's
All right.
get going.
I'm ready.
This is good. Let's use this.
Ready, bro?
Yeah. Fratelloni's Hardware and Garden Stores brings you Garage Logic podcast number 1332, June 24th, 2024. 101 degrees on this day in 1988, and 44 degrees was the low on this day in 1972. The swimming season is in full bloom. If you own a lake home or you got the old swimming hole out back, I hope you've been getting a hold of Aquaside. They've been maintaining Great Lake shores for more than 60 years with a complete line of lake and pond control products. They take care of everything from weeds to algae. The products are easy to use. They work quickly. They're made in White Bear Lake. They're registered with the EPA and DNR. There's no needs to let weeds overtake your lake or pond this summer. Call Aquaside today. They'll help you identify your weed problem and make sure your place looks great all summer long. Call Aquaside at 1-800-328-9350 or go to aquaside.com.
Hail the flashlight king.
And now, from the mayor's office above the boathouse on the east shore of Spoon Lake, it's Garage Logic with Chris Reavers manning Technology Corner, Kenny Olson from the Krabby Coffee Shop, John Heidt in the newsroom, and of course, the Rookie. Here is your flashlight king, fireworks commissioner, and the keeper of common sense, your mayor, Joe Souchere.
Just one note before we begin talking to Bill. You'll recall that we were talking about that exploding star that we'll witness.
Oh, yeah.
Sometime between now and September.
And then I got a note from Jeff who writes, Joe, you realize the star has already exploded. It just takes many light years to see the result.
Oh, that's a literalist. That's a literalist.
Bill Glahn is joining us. He's in the studio with us. Bill is a policy fellow with the Center of the American Experiment. He's been doing the Lord's work, tracking scandals in the state of Minnesota, frauds in the state of Minnesota. And Bill, among your jobs in the past, you were a research consultant for the Minnesota House of Representatives.
That's correct.
Did any of that experience, is that helping you understand what's going on right now, having been inside the cage there?
Yeah. So a lot of this stuff, especially with these nonprofits, it's been amazing to see the connections between not just these frauds, but the fact that some of them have gotten appropriations from the state legislature over the years, and knowing how to track all that and look up those numbers and look up those bills. So that it's been useful for that aspect for sure.
Do you have your math in front of you?
I do.
Could you read it to us, please?
So there were a couple of interesting things that came out of this legislative auditor report. And the legislative auditor does good work. Her name is Judy Randall. Jim Nobles used to be the auditor. He retired. You remember him. He did great work. Judy does great work. And she dug in. It took a couple of years to get to the bottom of it, but she dug into the Department of Education's handling of just feeding our future.
Right. Because the checks ultimately came through the Department of Education.
It was mostly federal money, a little bit of state money mixed in, but the entity that issued the checks was the Department of Education.
Right.
And she had a couple of really helpful tables to show the explosive growth of this. And I know you were highlighting one of the numbers, the 2,800% growth, which should have been a red flag. And it was a red flag, So one of the things about this whole scandal that the auditor, she documented with timelines and all kinds of supporting documentation, was the Department of Education knew about this from before the beginning. This nonprofit was formed in 2017, didn't begin participating into the program until 2018, Feeding Our Future I'm speaking of, and they had red flags from day one. Unfortunately, it was a multi-year battle between the two of them, and more often than not, the department didn't have the courage of its convictions to follow through and cut off the money. But what I was focusing on, and this came out in the testimony that the auditor gave in front of a joint committee a couple of weeks ago, that was in the fiscal year 2021, the Feeding Our Future took $140 million out of the program, which was more than 40% of the entire program.
Okay.
This one nonprofit out of the hundreds that participate in the program, hundreds of nonprofits, one nonprofit took 40% of all the dollars. And then it was a similar story for the next fiscal year. And I did some math where Feeding Our Future was the subject of the report the auditor did, but there were two other large nonprofits that were mentioned in this recent trial in federal court as being part of the larger scandal. One was called Partners in Nutrition.
Right.
And there was a third one, was called Youth Leadership Academy. It was smaller. It does business or did business as Gargar Family Services. Department of Education, after the scandal broke, kicked all three of them out of the program. All three were booted from the program. Their officers were banned from participating in the program going forward, even under a different nonprofit. These were the three largest nonprofits in the program. I added together the 2021 numbers to the 2022 numbers for all three of those nonprofits. It came up to more than 70%. That's more than 2/3, more than 70% of the total dollars from this free food program went to the big three nonprofits who the department decided weren't fit to participate in the program.
But they still got the money.
They still got the money.
Well, how could that be?
It's amazing. And there hasn't been a really good explanation for it.
Okay, we need to explore how that could be.
So the Department of Education and the governor's office have given a couple of different explanations over the years. And I'll throw in the Keith Ellison at the Attorney General's office has thrown in different explanations why this kept going month after month, year after year. And none of the explanations have turned out to be founded in fact, as the auditor documents in her 120-page report. So one of the explanations was, well, this state judge in Ramsey County made us pay the invoices. And that's not true. And we know that's not true because the judge himself, I've never heard of this. I've never heard of a judge issuing a press release. But this judge, John Guthman, state judge, his court is in Ramsey County, says, and his order is fairly clear. He didn't order them to keep paying.
Right.
He ordered them to follow the rules of the program.
Right.
If you're going to stop paying, you got to jump through it. Hoop A, hoop B, hoop C. And they said, well, we're just going to keep paying them instead of jumping through the hoops.
Right.
Then there was another one was, well, we called the cops. We were the ones who called the FBI and alerted the FBI to this fraud.
The Department of Education?
The Department of Education has made that claim, and that claim has been repeated by the governor and the attorney general.
Can any documentation back that up?
In fact, the documentation backs up the opposite. That they say they called the cops in March or April of 2021, but the auditor was able to document in February, the previous month, it was the FBI who called the department saying, hey, have you heard of this Feeding Our Future? And have you got your eyes on these guys? I think they're ripping you off. So the cops called them.
Oh, my God.
Now, they were already aware of Feeding Our Future. As I pointed out, they've been aware of them for years, just not doing anything about it. So the two big explanations, a judge made us continue to pay these invoices, and we
which
called
is
the
not
cops,
true.
Which is not true. And we called the cops.
That's
the cops
not
called
true.
Them. So there is no explanation left as to why they kept paying these invoices.
Yes, there is. And we need to discover what it is. I don't think it's unreasonable to wonder who in the administration was getting paid. I know that's harsh. I know that's bold, but this is ridiculous. Was it, for example, somebody had 120 grand cash laying around their kitchen cupboard to stick in a bag to try to bribe a juror. So isn't it reasonable to wonder if the same types of people who would bribe a juror would be bribing somebody in the administration?
Well, the governor says no.
Of course he says no.
One of his very few comments on the case was last Monday, where he said that nobody in his administration, nobody in the department has been charged with anything or indicted with anything.
Well,
there was no malfeasance. No malfeasance.
Then how come Heather Mueller, who joined in the spring of 21, left in the fall of 22?
Right. Well, and again, the governor's explanation of that is, well, a lot of people don't stick around for a second term, that they serve in the first term. And then
she didn't even make it through the first term.
So again, he tried to imply that she left because of this scandal, but when a couple of reporters pushed him on that, he backed off. And
did she leave with a bag full of money?
So it's interesting.
I mean, is that a legitimate thing to wonder?
I think it's a legitimate thing to wonder. In fact, at that hearing I mentioned that happened a couple weeks ago, one of the state representatives asked the question, have anybody in the department been disciplined as a result of this?
And they have not been.
And they have not been. That's the answer. There was huge amounts of pushback. And then there was a follow-up question of the auditor. One of the, I can't remember if it was a state rep or a state senator, asked the auditor whether there was any criminal investigation underway of anybody who worked for the department. Mm-hmm. She didn't say no. She didn't say not to my knowledge. She just said it wouldn't be appropriate for me to answer that.
I wonder who could answer that.
I think that would be very
I wonder who could answer that.
I don't know.
Isn't it time to start looking in that direction? But what about campaign contributions? Is there a way to discover how many of these food fraudsters made large campaign contributions to, say, Keith Ellison or Governor Tim Walz or...
Yeah, so I've looked into that and documented. Again, there's more to document. But yes, all that data is public. If you or I write a check to a politician for their campaign and it's above a nominal amount, it gets recorded, your name, your address, your employer. And so we've been able to track tens of thousands of dollars of donations from people who have been indicted, some of them even convicted in the case, to Keith Ellison, to his son, who's a city council member in Minneapolis, to Mayor Fry, to Congresswoman Omar, State Senator Fatah. They've all I could go on and on.
And they're all using stolen money to make these contributions.
Well, that was the presumption. So a lot of this came out right when the FBI raids were first made public. Mm-hmm. And a couple of the people who were recipients made big shows of returning the money or sending the money to the state treasury or the federal treasury. But again, that was that first batch of people. But as more get added to the list, either through indictment or charges or names coming out in courtroom settings, that the list keeps growing. And nobody in the media or elsewhere is following up again. There was the big splash 2 years ago, but we keep adding every few months more people to the indictment list. We're up to 70, and those
two things. Might it reach the point where an indicted will say the hell with this and throw Ellison or Walz under the bus to save themselves?
It's possible. Again, I don't know the dynamics that, would anybody ask the question? So we have a U.S. attorney who's done great work on this. But would anybody dare to ask the question?
I will.
A lot of people don't ask questions they don't want to hear the answer to.
Why is this story not more all-consuming in Minnesota? Why is this not? I fear that it doesn't have legs. It's not gaining traction.
Well, that's how I got involved in it. I saw the initial FBI raids in January 2022, and within 2 days, the story was gone. It was, nobody was reporting on him. Right? I'm thinking, man, we didn't know it was 250 million back then. Back then, the number we were given was 40 or 50 million. Mm-hmm. Still sounds like a massive fraud worth looking into, but I've other than the obvious political bias answer, we have quite a bit smaller Capitol Press Corps than we had even just a few years ago.
Yep.
We don't have the local newspaper coverage that we had even just a few years ago.
That's right.
So, again, it was interesting where we had the bribery attempt. You mentioned the $125,000 or $120,000 in the Hallmark gift bag. Mm-hmm. That got international attention.
It did.
It was a big splash here for about a day or so. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't know whether it's just news departments are so understaffed.
They are.
But that's such a huge story. That would be the
But it goes against the template of the conventional news gatherers, all of whom are pretty much left-leaning, would be my opinion.
You have that. You have the obvious political bias, and it doesn't seem to be counteracted by the love of the big story.
Right.
You know, I could win a Pulitzer Prize for this. I could win a Peabody Award for this story. It's that kind of a story that doesn't seem to be motivating very many people. Now, I will give some credit to the alternative media in Minnesota.
Yes, very much so.
So not just me, but even more, Minnesota Reformer was a left-leaning organization.
Alpha News,
a right-leaning organization. Sahan Journal, a left-leaning organization. These alternative outlets have been all over this. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to mention any other outlets, but there's been some reporters here and there who are very big in covering the story and haven't let it go. Mm-hmm. So thanks for doing that.
Thank you.
Have you guys seen, you mentioned Ilhan Omar, have you seen her latest ad?
I have not.
Ahead of the primary. I'm not joking. I'm trying to find it. Everything she touts about what she's done for this is related directly to all of the frauds that Bill had laid out in his piece. Every single one of them.
Yeah, I did see the ad. I saw it on the golf tournament, the U.S. Open. Watching the U.S. Open on TV, and there's Ilhan, touting all of her accomplishments,
feeding kids, and
I don't know if that's her target audience.
What's with feeding kids?
There seems to be a weird obsession with this because we have the governor who's going on these national talk shows, talking about how he did the program where we're going to feed all the school kids, even the sons of millionaires and billionaires.
Here, we're going to play something for you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. You recently had a viral moment where you were feeding kids free breakfast. Yeah. Will you talk about the federal expansion there when it comes to free food for hungry children?
Well, we know that it makes a difference. I'm a, 2-decade school teacher. We know that full bellies make better learners. But look, you're seeing the contrast in this when you get a Democratic governor versus a Republican governor. Look, we don't have the 10 Commandments posted in our classrooms, but we have free breakfast and lunch. Those are policies that the Biden-Harris administration are talking about going nationally. It makes a huge difference. We used what we learned during the pandemics on the child tax credit. Minnesota's going to reduce childhood poverty by 1/3. We already have one of the lowest numbers.
I can't listen to this BS. He's lying, and he's deflecting when he doesn't even have to, because the idiot who asked him the question didn't even bother to bring up the food fraud. So I'm not sure they were aware of it, or
there's no way they couldn't have been aware of it. It was
hands off. But one guy could do a great deal to solve this, and that would be Walz. He's been a terrible failure. Well, he's not said anything.
I believe what they were talking about, this summer EBT program. And on my list of frauds that I included one for SNAP, because it's a huge fraud-ridden program. And the U.S. attorney doing great work trying to go after some of it, but this idea that we already have a program that's suspect, this EBT SNAP program, and we're going to expand it to summer, where we already have the program we've been talking about for the entire show here, has a summer component to it. So it just seems triple, quadruple redundancies. Where are the hungry kids?
I haven't seen any.
So we have it's called the Summer Food Service Program, and that was one of the big programs in this food fraud. We already have schools themselves continue the school lunch program in summer, summer school kids, and we have the regular EBT program, which goes year round. We have this child and adult care food program, which was the other big program in the fraud. That's a year-round program. And now we're going to add summer EBT. Interestingly enough, he's trying to contrast some Republican-run states, some red states declined to add this program, the summer EBT programs. It's not needed. It's redundant.
Like to buy Walz for what he's worth and sell him for what he thinks he's worth. So, because he has national aspirations.
Yeah, he wants to be president, vice president, the next president.
Well, the country needs to be warned that he's terribly incompetent, and he might very well be a thief. I have no idea.
But it's this idea that we need another food program when we already have, and I sat down and counted, it quickly got to double digits, the number of federal and state food programs aimed at feeding children, poor children. And now we've added this summer EBT program, yet another program, which I think he claims is going to feed 400,000 kids, which is, again,
do we have that many in Minnesota?
Where are they finding that?
We have that many, but 400,000 is the vast majority of them. So again, he talks about the poverty rate and he talks about the child population, and like every one of these programs is going to serve every kid. And I can't believe how many meals we're serving. Well, as it turns out, in the Feeding Our Future, few, if any.
We're speaking with Bill Glahn of the Center of the American Experiment. We'll be back in just a moment.